19-year-old Jason Abarca disappeared into the Appalachian Mountains after a terrifying carjacking and chase. Search teams combed the area, canines tracked his scent, and the police launched a manhunt, but somehow he vanished without a trace. His family refused to give up on him, though. They knew he was still somewhere in the mountains near Tannery, Virginia. But as the weeks turned into months, hope began to fade, and the official narrative started raising more questions than answers. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Jason was found, but the condition of his remains, the unusual body position, and what the autopsy revealed left investigators with more mysteries than conclusions. Buried inside that autopsy were findings that never have been fully explained, and we will be talking a lot about that today. Was this simply a tragic death in the wilderness, or had something happened in those Appalachian mountains that no one has ever fully investigated? Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell before you go. All right, friends, let's get into today's case. Jason Diego Abarca was born on March 9th, 2004 in Rockville, Maryland, to his mom, Jennifer Soto, and dad, Rafael Abarca. He grew up in Montgomery County, and then his family eventually relocated to Hagerstown, Maryland in October of 2023, which was just 2 months before today's case takes place. He was the youngest of 6 kids, so he was the baby of a very big family, and he was loved on like the youngest of any family would be. Jason's parents didn't end up staying together, but his mom married a man named Benito Soto, who was like a second dad to Jason ever since he was 6 years old. Jason was a natural-born athlete. He played football, ran track, played basketball, and wrestled. He went to the gym all the time, and then he got into boxing and trained consistently at that as well. Jason picked up on his physical talents pretty quickly, and then somehow became even better at them. He also loved playing Xbox with his brothers, as most teenage boys do, and Jason worked full-time at Rainforest Distributions in Frederick, Maryland in their warehouse. But Jason had even bigger dreams. He had spoken with an Army recruiter and scored pretty well on the ASVAB, which is the military aptitude test, because he wanted to follow in his older brother Corey's footsteps by joining the Army someday. But tragically, his older brother passed away in May of 2023, and Jason carried his big brother's casket. This loss deeply impacted him and the rest of his family. He idolized his big brother. Jason also struggled with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, also known as ADHD, and he was taking medication for this for several years. As always, you know that I'm mentioning this now because it will definitely be brought up throughout today's video. Jason was managing his ADHD with a prescription called Adderall, and he'd taken it for several years without any issues. He was just a young man moving through the world, holding down a job, making plans, and grieving quietly. And then in November 2023, he was in a car accident on his way to work. It was a fairly minor accident, but still bad enough to where his family's regular vehicle needed repairs. That's why they had a rental SUV in December, which will come into play here shortly. On December 13th, 2023, Jennifer and Benito Soto were out celebrating their wedding anniversary. Jason was home alone after not getting much sleep for a couple of days, and he was 7 months into his grieving process. But sometime that afternoon, something shifted. He took more than his prescribed dose of Adderall, and Jennifer said that she didn't exactly know how much he took. She also said that she didn't know why he did. What she did know is that before he left the house that day, he apparently took 2 of her kitchen knives, got into the rental SUV, and then drove south on the Interstate 81 towards Winchester, Virginia. He left around 3 that afternoon, and Winchester's about 37 miles from Hagerstown, or about a 40-minute drive at a normal speed. Now, when it comes to Jason taking too much of his medication, Adderall is a stimulant drug made from amphetamines. In normal doses, it helps people with ADHD to focus by increasing certain brain chemicals like dopamine and norepinephrine, but when someone takes too much, the effects can become very dangerous very quickly. High doses of stimulants can trigger something called stimulant-induced psychosis, which is a real medical condition where the person can become severely paranoid and disconnected from reality. This can look very similar to schizophrenia as it's happening. Someone experiencing this may believe that people are after them or trying to hurt them, and they can hear or see things that are not actually there. This may sound familiar to when we talked about Alfred Wright's case. Their ability to think clearly and make rational decisions becomes heavily impaired as well. mainly because the brain is no longer processing reality normally. Lack of sleep makes this dramatically worse. Going 2 days without proper sleep while also taking too much Adderall can push someone into a severe mental health crisis. Around 3:30 that afternoon, Jason crashed the rental SUV on the I-81 southbound off-ramp to Berryville Avenue in Winchester. He got out of the car and kept moving though. 9 minutes later at 3:39 p.m., Winchester police dispatchers received a call about a person matching Jason's description, carrying a knife and attempting to carjack a vehicle near Berryville Avenue. Officers responded, but he ran before they could find him. At 4:02 p.m., so just 23 minutes after that first attempt, Jason allegedly approached another vehicle, but this time in the McDonald's parking lot at 1124 Berryville Avenue. According to the Winchester Police Department's media release, he ran up to the car with a knife, forced the female to get out of the car, and then stole her vehicle. She was not physically harmed in this incident. In 32 minutes, Jason had gone from crashing a car to forcing a woman out of her own at knife point. Something else happened in that McDonald's parking lot that's never been officially investigated, though. Jennifer Soto obtained what she described as a Shenandoah County Sheriff's Office incident report that documented 4 people witnessed the carjacking and immediately chased the attacker. One of them called 911 and told them that he was in active pursuit of Jason and he had a gun and was not afraid to use it. She also said that police photos of the vehicle that he stole, they show significant damage to the rear of the car, consistent with being struck from behind or run off the road. I'll talk about what came from this later on in today's video. After stealing the vehicle from McDonald's, Jason drove southwest out of Winchester. The route from Berryville Avenue to Star Tannery Road is about 15 to 18 miles. This path moves from Winchester's suburban commercial area out through rural Frederick County and then into the county's western edge. Under normal conditions, that drive takes about 20 to 25 minutes. Whether or not Jason drove out there by choice or if he was being actively chased from behind has never been addressed. Star Tannery is not the kind of place that you end up by accident, though. This is a tiny rural community in the far southwestern part of Frederick County, right near the Shenandoah County line. The area is deep in the Appalachian mountain region where steep ridges and narrow valleys stretch for miles. Even though the town itself sits at about 800 feet above sea level, the surrounding mountains rise up all around you, creating rough, uneven terrain that can become very dangerous very fast. This community is also extremely small, and it only has a post office and a volunteer fire station. Star Tannery Road is not a paved highway, by the way. It's just a gravelly mountain road surrounded by thick woods, rocky hillsides, and deep valleys. There are almost no homes, buildings, or streetlights in that area either. In December, the woods become especially difficult to navigate, and we also know the lore of the Appalachian Mountains as well. The forest is filled with thick brush, uneven ground, and hidden drop offs that can easily trip or disorient anybody. At night, without a flashlight or any source of light, it would be nearly impossible to navigate, especially in Jason's state of mind. This was where Jason and the stolen car ended up on the evening of December 13th, 2023. The car was found on a stretch of Star Tannery Road, but Jason was nowhere to be found. What they did find inside was Jason's wallet and ID. At this point, the police believed that 19-year-old Jason had run into the mountains with nothing on him. A canine unit from the Frederick County Sheriff's Office responded to the crash scene that night, and the dogs tracked Jason's scent from the car to the edge of the road. And there, at the tree line, the trail went cold. The FCSO later confirmed that investigators felt he ran from the crash site on foot, so it was really surprising that the canines couldn't detect his scent at the tree line. It was almost as if the dogs were afraid to enter. Average overnight temps for the Winchester-Frederick County area in December are around 28 degrees Fahrenheit, so well below freezing, and in the mountains it gets even cooler. A person that took too many stimulants may feel their heart racing, body temp elevated, and sweating, which means their clothing is likely wet. Now, wet clothes in sub-freezing temperatures accelerates heat loss quickly. A healthy adult can develop life-threatening hypothermia within hours under those conditions, especially if they're exhausted. So if Jason wasn't able to think clearly enough to go seek warm shelter, his life was in danger, and police knew that. What Jennifer feared the most about the crash, though, is that she felt Jason may have fallen asleep behind the wheel. Adderall at high doses suppresses sleep, so prevents it, and the crash that follows can be drastic, especially after 2 days without sleep. The body simply just shuts down. If Jason lost consciousness behind the wheel on that stretch of gravelly mountain road, the car would have drifted off without any steering. That is one possible explanation for why the crash happened on an open stretch of a road instead of running into something. The other explanation is that rear damage that was seen in the police photos meant that someone hit the car from behind and the crash was not an accident at all. No matter what, though, Jason was still missing and he needed to be found for his own safety at this point. We're going to get into the search efforts now and just be prepared to feel frustrated because the first weeks after he disappeared, there was a chain of failures that a 19-year-old paid for with his life, and no one has been held accountable for any of them. On the night of December 13th, when the canine trail ended at the tree line and it was clear that Jason had gone into the woods by foot, the FCSO deployed a drone. They later admitted that this was a misstep on their part, and here's why this was a problem. A drone camera flying over a closed winter forest canopy can't detect a person under the trees because it acts as a barrier, and the police knew that. A helicopter with thermal imaging is an entirely different tool, and better in this case because it detects the heat signature of a living body through the canopy. This resource exists for this exact type of search, but the decision was made not to use it. At the same time, the Winchester Police Department were doing exactly what they thought they should when someone commits a carjacking in their city. They were building a fugitive case. They issued a public notice describing Jason as a dangerous suspect, and they put out a warrant for his arrest. They entered him into the missing person system as a fugitive, not as a missing person in crisis. A missing person versus a missing fugitive would look very different in terms of resources and investigation. The family started looking for Jason immediately, though. Jennifer, Benito, and all their family members drove out to Star Tannery in the days after December 13th and searched themselves. They walked those mountain roads, looked into the tree lines, and they found nothing, but they kept going back. Jennifer told reporters that she believed that her son was in those woods from the very beginning. She said, "I think he would have called me if he was alive. He knows my number by heart." No mother should have to experience this type of anguish. Somewhere between 1 and 1:30 in the morning on December 14th, so about 6 to 9 hours after Jason went into those woods, a witness near the crash site reported seeing the light of a cell phone in the darkness. Whoever was holding it ran into the trees the moment they realized that they'd been spotted, though. Could it have been Jason? Was he hiding, fleeing, or possibly trying to call for help? We don't know because this lead was never followed up on. Meanwhile, the U.S. Marshals were brought in by Winchester PD to help them with the whole fugitive investigation. Jennifer said that the Marshals traveled all the way to Baltimore and surrounded a family member's vehicle with their guns drawn and sniper lasers pointed right at them because they felt Jason could be hiding out there. But Jason wasn't there, and this reaction was definitely over the top. His family was still out there looking for him as this was happening. The first large-scale search of the Star Tannery area happened on January 3rd, 2024, 21 days after Jason went missing. The family said that the search covered about 25% of the terrain to the left of the crash site. Sergeant Mark Ellinger of the FCSO coordinated the operation, and he told reporters that about 50 to 60 search and rescue people were on the ground, including tons of people from teams of the FCSO, Winchester PD, Frederick County Fire and Rescue, Winchester Emergency Management, Virginia State Police, and Blue and Gray Search and Rescue Dogs, Inc., which is a volunteer group. ATVs were used to navigate the dense terrain, and people went into the woods by foot as well. The dogs went in, but they lost Jason's scent trail once again. The teams combed the area until the end of the day, and they came back with nothing. Sergeant Ellinger told reporters at that January 3rd search that the chances of finding Jason alive were not good. He'd been missing for 3 weeks at this point in December in the mountains in cold conditions, and that was true. But it was also devastating for a family to hear that as they're holding their breath searching for their loved one. Additional searches continued through the rest of January, involving combinations of all those other agencies. Sergeant Ellinger had searched on Christmas Eve as well, and teams went out multiple times in early January. Every search came back empty-handed, though, and by February, the search parties were beginning to dwindle down. The Winchester PD still had a wanted notice on their Facebook page that described Jason as dangerous, and it said nothing at all about a family waiting by the phone or out there searching for him. It also made no mention of his mental health or any type of crisis happening at the time. By April, Jennifer said, "I know my son is dead." She said she no longer believed he had simply frozen in the mountains and that something had happened to him in those woods because this is when she received that incident report that I mentioned earlier, the one about people chasing her son. She said maybe someone saw what happened. Maybe someone was involved and they didn't want to be involved and they've got a guilty conscience. If someone was involved in the murder of my son, of course I want justice, but I need to find my son's body and give him rest. On April 29th, 2024, 138 days after Jason disappeared, the FCSO gathered another search party of 78 people. This was the largest search that they conducted in this case. At 1:25 that afternoon, members of the FCSO search and rescue team found human remains in a densely wooded area between Star Tannery Road and North Pifer Road. The distance from the crash site was less than a quarter mile, and he'd been there the entire time. Sheriff Milholland personally called the Soto family, and Benito drove to the scene as quickly as he could to see if this was his son. He confirmed the remains were Jason's by his physical features and by the blue and black coat, which is the same one that Jason had been wearing when he left Hagerstown on December 13th. The remains were collected and transported to the medical examiner in Manassas, Virginia. Benito spoke to reporters that afternoon and said what the family had been saying for 4.5 months. From the very beginning, they knew their son was still there. Before we get into the autopsy findings, though, I want to talk about how Jason was found because this is at the center of every question that the family still has. Reports started circulating immediately that Jason was found inside of a hollow tree, which is not true. The FCSO confirmed that one of Jason's legs was wedged into the Y section of a large tree roughly 5 feet above the ground, and the rest of his body hung downward from that point, so he was essentially inverted. A Y fork 5 feet up a tree sits roughly chest height for an average standing adult, or higher if you're approaching from downhill. Getting one leg stuck into that fork requires that either someone was climbing the tree, jumping and catching a branch, or they were placed there. Each of those possibilities could suggest something different about what happened in those woods. The area around the tree was not processed at all as a crime scene, and there was no report released stating that forensic evidence was collected on the ground either. That means that they didn't look for footprints or disturbed soil or blood, and the bark of the tree was not swabbed or treated as a potential scene either. The area was only processed solely as body recovery. Whatever was in and around that tree on April 29th, 2024, was not treated as a potential homicide investigation, even if it was just to rule out homicide. Now, to get into the autopsy, FCSO confirmed that the remains were in fact Jason Diego Abarca. Even though Benito knew that it was him, they still needed to forensically confirm the identity. The Virginia Office of the Chief Medical Examiner ruled the cause of death as undetermined. I typically close out the autopsy portion with the ME's findings, but I'm leading with it in this case because there is a very concerning finding that hasn't been properly addressed. No manner of death was classified, and because of that, this case was closed right away. The undetermined ruling is not necessarily wrong, but it also doesn't explain a significant injury that we need to talk about. Jason's remains had been in an outdoor wooded environment in the Appalachian Mountains from the evening of December 13th, 2023 through April 29th, 2024. That is an extended period of time. The remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, and as we know, decomposition starts the moment a person dies, and the body goes through several stages over time. First, the fresh stage, the bloating, then the active decay, and eventually skeletonization, where mostly just bones remain. How fast this happens depends heavily on the environment. In the Star Tannery area during December and January, nighttime temps drop below freezing. That cold slowed down the two biggest things that normally break a body down quickly: bacteria and insect activity. But freezing temperatures don't completely stop decomposition. Instead, winter creates another damaging process called freeze-thaw cycling. And this is the first time we're going to be talking about this here on the channel. Freeze-thaw cycling happens when temps drop below freezing at night, but then warm back up during the day. We know that cooler temperatures and warmer temperatures do the exact opposite things to remains, though. Water inside the body's cells freeze and expand, which causes the cells to burst open. Then, when temps rise again, the damaged tissues begin to break down further because bacteria can now get into those destroyed cells. This process repeats over and over through the winter months, and by the time spring arrives and those mountains and weather starts to consistently warm up, insect activity becomes very active again, so decomposition will speed up dramatically. One of the main insects responsible for breaking down bodies outside, at least in the eastern part of the US, is the blowfly. These flies can detect the smell released by decomposing tissue from a long distance away. Once temperatures are warm enough, they can find human remains within hours, or any remains for that matter, and a single blowfly can lay hundreds of eggs at once, usually in natural openings of the body or in the wounds. Those eggs hatch into maggots and then they consume the soft tissue. Fun fact, medical grade maggots are used in the hospitals to promote healthy new tissue growth as they eat away the necrotic or dead tissue. I have had to use them on patients and it can be very beneficial if you've got the stomach for it. In warm spring conditions, maggots can strip away exposed tissue very quickly, sometimes reducing large portions of the body down to bone within days or weeks. By the time Jason's remains were discovered in April, his body had been exposed to months of winter weather, repeated freeze-thaw cycles, and then increasingly warm spring weather for 6 to 8 weeks. Because of that, a lot of his exposed soft tissue was either severely decomposed or completely gone. That includes the skin, muscle, body fat, and internal organs. As we know, most of the important evidence that the doctors rely on to determine how someone died exists in the soft tissues. Bruises can only be seen if skin and tissue are still present, and internal bleeding requires organs and soft tissue to examine as well. Signs of strangulation requires the structures of the neck to still exist, and knife wounds require intact skin to identify the entry points. When the soft tissue has decomposed away, those injuries cannot be properly documented anymore. That doesn't mean those injuries never happened, it only means that the environment destroyed the evidence that could have proven them. This was incredibly hard on the family to hear because this meant that many of the answers they were hoping to find may never come. What usually survives despite all of this is the skeleton. In Jason's case, the skeleton revealed the most important and concerning finding in this entire case, which was a fracture to the back of his skull. Specifically, the fracture involved the occipital bone, which is the thick bone at the lower back portion of the skull. That area protects critical parts of the brain, including the cerebellum, which controls coordination and balance, and the brainstem, which controls vital functions like breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, and consciousness. Because the occipital bone is naturally thick and strong, it typically takes significant force to fracture it. So, how on earth could this have happened to Jason? There are several ways an injury like this could have occurred. One possibility is an accidental fall backward, where someone maybe slips and strikes the back of their head on rocks, frozen ground, or maybe even a tree. Another possibility is blunt force trauma, meaning Jason may have been struck in the back of the head with an object like a rock or a piece of wood or something similar by someone else. That explanation aligns more closely with the family's belief that foul play was involved. A third possibility is that the fracture happened after death because of environmental damage over time. Months of decomposing could potentially weaken or crack bone after death, but in my humble opinion, this seems the most unlikely of the three. We are allowed to speculate here, by the way, because this hasn't been addressed. Forensic pathologists can typically tell the difference between fractures that happened around the time of death and fractures that occurred later on after death, though. When bone is still fresh and contains moisture and blood supply, fractures usually look irregular and curved. They also usually show hemorrhagic staining, which means blood seeped into the broken bone at the moment the injury occurred because the heart was still beating at the time. That is strong evidence that the person was still alive or very close to death when the injury happened. And on the opposite end, fractures that happened after death in dry bone usually have a cleaner, straighter edge, and there's no evidence of bleeding into the bone because the heart has stopped. The problem is, the public has never been told if Jason's skull showed signs of it being a fresh or post mortem break. The medical examiner confirmed that the fracture exists, but they've never explained what caused it or if it likely happened before or after death. So, what remains is a deeply concerning fact that Jason had a fractured skull, but no official explanation for how or when it even happened. This is probably the piece that is the hardest to reconcile for Jason's family. The toxicology evidence was also extremely limited in this case because of his remains. After 138 days outside, the samples that they needed may not have even been usable anymore. There are more specialized forms of testing that we've talked about in other cases as well that can still work on heavily decomposed remains, like bone marrow or hair sample testing, but it's never been publicly shared whether or not those tests were done on Jason. Because of that, we don't even know if the police ever confirmed the presence of Adderall or other substances in his system at the time during his final hours. Again, this is hugely problematic when it comes to closure for Jason's loved ones. Jason's family quickly pushed for an independent autopsy outside of Virginia because of the lack of all of the findings, the skull fracture, and the police closing the case very quickly. Benito said that they believe foul play may have occurred here and they wanted an unbiased exam and investigation. He was also worried about preserving the evidence and making sure that the investigation was handled properly. Unfortunately, we don't know if that outside autopsy has even happened. What is known is that the medical examiner ruled Jason's death undetermined, the case was closed, and no criminal investigation into how he died was ever opened by law enforcement in Virginia, despite that incident report of people chasing him down. There is one more forensic angle that hasn't been talked about very much in this case, and that's the possible role of a forensic anthropologist. A forensic anthropologist is different from your standard ME or forensic pathologist because their specialty is analyzing bones and skeletal trauma, especially in cases where decomposition is advanced. In situations like Jason's, where the soft tissue evidence is gone, a forensic anthropologist can sometimes provide even more detailed findings about fractures and trauma that maybe a standard ME wouldn't know. So, to give a little grace to the ME that conducted this autopsy, it may not have been their specialty. But if that were the case, then why did they not contact a forensic anthropologist? Something that I keep coming back to is exactly how Jason was facing, whether that was to the side or perfectly facing away from the tree. If he were climbing up the tree and fell backwards, let's say, hitting his head, but his legs were still caught up into the tree, then I could see that being an accident where he may have struck the back of his head. But a forensic anthropologist could analyze the direction and force of the impact to be the one to make that determination as an expert. Since the occipital bone is one of the stronger bones in the skull and tends to resist breaking after death, a detailed skeletal analysis could still potentially provide meaningful information. Unfortunately, we don't know if the family pursued that type of exam or if the remains were even preserved in a way that would have allowed it. After the ME's ruling was released in June of 2024, law enforcement closed the case. The criminal investigation into the carjackings was over because Jason was found dead and the dead cannot be prosecuted. He faced potential charges of carjacking and attempted carjacking, which carries a mandatory sentence of 15 years and a maximum of life in prison in Virginia. Chief Behan said during the search that if he were found, charges would follow, and Virginia law does not automatically absolve a suspect on the basis of mental illness. But he was not found alive, so no charges were ever filed. The four individuals described in the Shenandoah County incident report, and remember, one of them reportedly told a dispatcher that he was in an armed pursuit of a carjacking suspect, have never been publicly identified, questioned, or named as suspects in any law enforcement statement. The incident report was never released. The Winchester PD wanted post of Jason stayed up on their Facebook all throughout this entire investigation, though. More than 2 years after his death was confirmed, the post describing Jason as a dangerous fugitive was still the first thing that came up if you searched for him on their page. Benito Soto said that the Winchester PD has only ever seen him as a fugitive or a criminal. The $1,000 reward that the department offered for any information about Jason was measly to his family, too. Benito said it just goes to show you how incompetent that police department is and how negative they were with their son's case. The Justice for Jason Abarca advocacy group started in April 2026 specifically because of that post. They tagged both agencies and wrote, "Why is their post still up? It's shameful and disrespectful. This is unacceptable," and they demanded immediate accountability. The Winchester Gazette actually covered Jason's story on April 7th, 2026, so not very long ago, and Winchester PD finally removed the post on the afternoon of April 6th, 2026. My best guess is the police department had to have been made aware that they were going to cover the story, so they decided to pull the post the day before that was published. The family has been relentless in advocating for Jason throughout all of this, though. They established the Justin for Jason Abarca website, and they launched 2 Change.org petitions calling for the case to be reopened, but by an independent agency. Their petition says, quote, "This family has been seeking justice since the day Jason disappeared on December 13th, 2023, and there was never and has never been a formal investigation into his death after his death was determined to be undetermined by the medical examiner's office," end quote. They set up a GoFundMe to hire a private investigator and independent forensic review as well, and I will be sure to link anything that I can find in the description box down below. Jason's 22nd birthday was on March 9th, 2026, and his parents wrote, "We love our son dearly and he deserves justice. Please consider supporting our effort to uncover the truth and hold those responsible accountable. What they're asking for is not complicated. They want this case formally reopened by an independent agency, not Winchester PD and not the Frederick County Sheriff's Office either, but with someone new with a fresh set of eyes and no investment in the conclusions that they've already made. They want that skull fracture examined in the context of a potential homicide investigation, and they want that incident report to be formally investigated too by someone with subpoena power to force them to talk. And they want to know why a helicopter was not deployed on the night of December 13th, 2023, when it may have changed everything. As of June 2026, the skull fracture at the back of Jason's head has never been attributed to any cause, and none of the other reasonable requests that Jason's family has made have been addressed either. And his family is still asking why. They deserve an answer, and I believe, as we've talked about in many other cases, that when a thorough investigation has been done, any outcome is easier to accept by the family. It's the what ifs, the grief, and the unexplored findings that keep families up at night wondering about what really happened to their loved ones. No parent should have to live the rest of their life with that level of turmoil. And in Jennifer's case, she's now lost 2 children. So she carries this more with her than I think any of us could even imagine. I can't fathom that level of heartache. The system failed Jason Abarca at many critical points in this investigation. He was only 19 years old, and yes, he made mistakes, but to be painted as this fugitive monster instead of a teenager in a mental health crisis was a gross misrepresentation of who he really was. He had his whole life ahead of him, and that is the piece that is the hardest to reconcile for his family. As always, I'll link any resources that I can in the description box down below, and I'm sending Jason and his family so much love and peace. Thank you so much for watching and listening to Jason's story today. Let me know what you thought about today's case, especially whether or not you feel this was a thorough enough investigation. Drop me a butterfly in the chat if you made it this far into today's video, and please be sure to take excellent care of yourselves this week, Nurse's Orders. I'll see you next time.